day when I was 16, I was in high school. I was bored that day. I have had many bored days in school. I'm sure you can identify with it. And suddenly, usually I feel sometimes like this moral responsibility that, oh shit, I have to go to my classes. But this day, this very day, the feeling, a bit like what I feel now, was very strong here, that I just decided to go to the mall, the shopping mall, one fine 16-year-old day. And I didn't know what I was looking for. I was just really bored, and then somehow I just started pursuing things, and things that interested me in the mall. And you know, growing up in Manila, there's not so many attractions for 16-year-olds like me than the mall. And I went to a disco, how do you say, a CD shop. And then I just started looking at all these colors, and then I saw a yellow thing. And until now, sometimes that's how I buy wine. I like it for the graphics, so I take the bottle. So I took a CD that like just popped into my eye because it was yellow. And it was just the yellow thing in my gray day today. And it was a CD written in another language that I didn't know yet, Portuguese. And then I played the music, and then the moment I heard it, something so new and yet familiar happened to me. It's like, wow. It's like I've heard this music before. Fast forward to 13, 14 years later, I am 30 years old, and I am in a beach called Ipanema in Rio de Janeiro, and singing this song myself that I learned when I was 16, which I didn't know. My question then is like, how do you end up where you end up? And how do you end up where you want to be? Like somehow I'm very interested with this, like how do you attract, like speaking of gravitational waves, how do you ride into something where you end up being in a place that you didn't fully consciously identify at the beginning, but when you end up there, there's just a kind of, oh wow, yes, I wanted this. And so I was very interested with the idea of serendipity, which in German you translate very well, Zufall, how something falls unto you. And somehow I discovered the study of this, or like, you cannot study this because it's not like a rocket exact science, it's more like a precise art, which makes it very unstable. Like how do you study the nature of your desires? Or this thing that is, you call sometimes butterfly in your stomach, or the things that just come up, you know, like you can explain it with hormones. Why? You know, what is it in us that also enacts or catalyzes this? So that little story that I said was just like many serendipities that I encountered in my life. Like I decided to do something, and then I end up somewhere like far. And I started to learn more about the nature or the patterns of serendipity when I started cooking leftovers. I came to Europe 8 years ago, which is another one of those serendipities and dream come trues that I had. And I realized when I came to Europe for the first time that I didn't cook so much in the Philippines. Because then I started to miss, like, I was in Amsterdam, and I started to live in an own apartment of my own, which was not happening in Manila a lot. So suddenly, I don't smell anything. And that somehow, and then I started to have nostalgia and memory of like things that I used to eat, and then I started cooking. The moment I sauteed the onions and the garlic in the oil, and I put some ginger and tomatoes and a bit of fish sauce. Suddenly the pungent odor of my grandmother's kitchen. It's like a portal in time. And then suddenly I start to see my memories that I always knew happened in a certain way into new perspectives. Like I can see an angle now that I didn't see before, the way I remembered it before. Something with this combination of smell, of this, what we call the will to do something, hunger, and that inspired me to somehow start doing a project which became what I call Nowhere Kitchen. It's like, oh wow, it's such interesting thing to awaken in somebody. And then I also studied anthropology, which I basically call contemporary gossip. Because anthropology is about finding out about other people. And I'm always interested with finding out about other people. And I thought, how would I do that? And it was not an idea that I had on my own, but I just blurted out to certain people. I started talking to some people that I know, like, oh, I love cooking, and then I started cooking for a lot of people. Then, maybe you should go to people's houses and just cook with whatever they have. And that's where I found out what was like the missing piece in my research of serendipity. It's what we call, unfortunately in our logic right now, improvisation. The I don't know. Like, I realized that when you start with I don't know, or if you translate it in cooking without recipes, because what happens when you cook with a recipe? Like, oh, I'm gonna make Thai food. I'm gonna download the recipe, and I'm gonna read it. What happens is that you get stuck somehow in this, the script, and somehow it arrests some of your senses away from you. But then when you put it out, and then you just say, I don't know, that's when you start to become afraid. And that's how it begins. To encounter, this thing that happens here, we have defined it for thousands of years into many kinds of emotions, like jealousy, fear, sadness, despair, restlessness, and all that stuff. These were the things that, like, imagine going to a person's house that you don't know and then just opening their fridge. Like, what do you find? And then I realized something. Then a host tells me, oh, we don't have so much. I did it in Madrid the first time in 2012, this cooking leftovers project. And it's also as a way to research the crisis of Madrid. How many time? And it was to do an ethnography of the crisis by opening their fridges. And I realized after dozens of times of opening people's fridges, I realized that when people say, oh, I have nothing, like, this is the common thing, that, oh, we don't have a lot. Like, I even went to a fridge of an anthropologist who had 2 shrunken carrots, 1 cucumber, and a hardened bread, and potato chips. And I said, what the hell am I gonna do with potato chips? It's like, when you don't have experience cooking things in a certain way, or like when you're just experienced with cooking things in a way that is supposed to be done, like rosemary is supposed to be mixed with this, jam is supposed to be with butter, then you feel entrapped, like, what do you do with the potato chips? But then, when I don't know, when you put on the I don't know attitude, then you realize, it's just basic chemistry. It's potato, reconstituted potato that has been dehydrated. And so I started putting milk on it. eggs. And then that's how I learned that with the potato you can make a typical potato chips. You can make, and I became famous for that in Madrid, my famous tortilla española. Made of potato chips. And that's how I learned that jam, because sometimes I went to a house with no sugar, then I found only jam. Because everywhere jam is a leftover. And then that's where I learned ingredients to start a jam, 90% sugar. Or ketchup, like ketchup, tomatoes, and sugar. Okay, maybe it could go to a barbecue sauce. Oh, peanuts and ketchup and oil can become peanut sauce. So what happens when you start to improvise and you learn to cook beyond the world of what we know as recipes? Because I know I have another thing with recipe, because the initial essence of recette is the document of the experience after. Like people would usually write down recipes after they have cooked, and not something to follow. So when you employ this attitude now of improvisation, you start to, instead of becoming this idea of a chef of the 21st century, you become a mathematician, a physicist, a chemist, an alchemist, and then you start, and also a visual artist, because then, once you remove the packaging of the stuff, then you see the essential things again. It becomes basic matter. And that's what I realized. A lot of our relationship with food has to do with prejudices. We have a lot of prejudice, especially with the term leftover. I'm happy that in the island where my mother was born, in the Philippines, we also have a translation for leftover, tada. Here in English, in the English world, tada is something that you, leftover is something that you kind of, the prevalent term is you waste or you throw away, or, and it has to do with the history in the last at least 150 years of industrialization. Like when man invented Tupperware, the microwave, when the fridge, which used to be from the military use, only started to go into the domestic houses. And that's how we started, this privatization of life, and somehow the fetishization of choice. And somehow all our desires got compartmentalized to things that we can buy or avail as long as we read the package correctly, or we have the proper subscription. And so, to go back to this word, tada, in the island where my mother lives, and I realized it only also later. I didn't pay attention to it before. It's only when I came and started cooking leftovers. Tada is an action word. It's the conscious act of leaving something behind for the other. And I think in the now, what we live in we have to accept that we live in a very capitalistic world. It's neither wrong nor right. It's just very excessive right now. And this is something that is always somehow discounted. The capacity or the possibility of sharing something. That leftover is not something that you should just think of, I cannot eat it anymore. I throw it away. In India, they offer this half-eaten food to an incarnation of Durga, a goddess of the music, and it should only be half-eaten food. So it's really about perceptions and prejudices. Do you still have time? Yeah. Now, how do you improvise? That's the thing. Because then when a lot of us are afraid of the thing of we don't know, how do you start? And I'm sure you will agree that when you start talking about it with some friends and go philosophizing and talking about it, like, Oh, yeah, good idea, good idea. And the next morning you wake up, you don't feel like doing it anymore, right? So how do you start? Start. And that's what I'm offering right now to you, this opportunity, because it's something that you can do anywhere. And that's why I call it Nowhere Kitchen. The act of cooking your leftovers. Your own leftovers. Start from your own. Close your eyes for 10 seconds. And imagine what's inside your fridge right now. And imagine if you are overlooking something, maybe you forgot something that is molding out there, or what's in your freezer? Do you still remember? I'm sure some of it you don't, because also for me, like yesterday, I found out that I had chickpeas in my house. Only when I'm broke, like when I have no money, that I found out things that that's the thing, when you have a lot of fetish of options, you tend to overlook a lot of things. But then, when you start looking, and then start using some of this, then you realize the fridge that you are imagining right now could also be your subconscious. It depends on you whether it is the garbage bin of your subconscious or your storage. Meaning something that you go back to later. And this is what I discovered, the parallel between leftovers and one's memory, the past. You were talking about small things, because, for example, a lot of our history has something to do with the big stuff, the death of Joan of Arc, the rise and fall of empires. And no amount of university degree or studies would educate you about your own family history. It's as mysterious as the space. You will encounter secrets, and the reason why you feel trapped something here emotionally because of some things that have happened before. It's something that I will need to explain in a more elaborate way later if you ask me some questions. But the act of cooking your own leftovers is a symbolic act of activism, of activating, because if you want to change the world, and I know what a lot of you are thinking because you're young, you all want to change the world. And you can start there in a very small way. Cook your own leftovers. And then maybe you will start to understand something that however we try to rationalize, we cannot. Something that we call feelings. Nothing more than feelings. Trying to forget mine. Feelings of love. Teardrops running down on my face. Trying to forget mine. Feelings of love. Feelings. For all my life I've been it. I wish we'd never met. You might not come again.